community gathered together on the teachings of Christ and the love and experience of God. And I just want to welcome you. I'm Bets. Did I already say that? I can't remember. Sorry. Whoa. I'm Bets. Good morning. I'm the youth pastor around here. I lead a youth group that meets on Tuesday nights at 6:30, and after these announcements, we meet across the hall for some Sunday school. So yeah, well, I'm gonna tell you what's going on this week here at the Vineyard. We have some ways you can get connected. Today, actually, we're doing a movie matinee for the unhoused at 1:30 to 5. We actually need volunteers to help serve popcorn and sodas to our friends that are experiencing homelessness. Okay. You can grab some lunch after church and come back here for an afternoon of volunteering. And there's also going to be the Jaguars game playing. So if you're a Jaggy Boy fan, come celebrate their first game. That starts at 12:30. And we also have something called Restorative Rhythms that's going to meet tomorrow at 6:30 right here in the sanctuary. Missy Spahn is leading a Restorative Rhythms is like a contemporary meditative. I'm not explaining it well at all. I'm so sorry. It's really sweet. It's like a holy yoga guided meditation. It's really, really beautiful. And there's a suggested donation of $10 for that. And then we have an ecstatic dance class that meets every Thursday at 5:45 with Blakely Stein. And there's a $15 suggested donation for that class. Yeah. And then we also have this Saturday a song poetry share, art share that meets at 5:30 on September 16th. That's a Saturday. So it is a safe, quiet, encouraging space to just celebrate your artistic abilities. So please come to that if you'd like. And you can also stay in the loop by signing up for our weekly newsletter. There's a QR code that you can scan and you'll get our weekly emails. And lastly, we do things a little bit differently at this church. We don't pass the offering plate. We do have giving boxes out in the hallway that you can leave your tithes, offerings, financial donations of that sort. You could also do it right now by scanning that QR code and giving online. So thank you. All size donations count. We appreciate all of your financial gifts. Thank you all so much. And also, if you'd like to get the word out, that would help too. We have invitations in the hall for all of our many happenings around here that you can give out to your friends, your family members, your neighbors. Just invite people. That would be really helpful. All right, and now if you are in middle school or high school, or 5th grade through high school, you can follow me across the hall, and we're gonna have some youth group Sunday school. All right, thank you all. Have a great Sunday.
Thanks, Bess. If you guys want to, mingle amongst yourselves for just a minute while I get set up, you could say hi or avert eye contact and avoid having to do that. Really, you can do whatever you'd like, but I need just a second. Okay, all right. You guys there? Hello. Good morning. Confession, I briefly lost track of where I set my notes down just then, and I felt a shock of panic that I'd have to try to do this without them, which hopefully just lets you know how much I enjoy studying and writing and come to depend on the things that reveal themselves over time. One of the, I guess, better, more personally advantageous aspects of this job is that it's amazing what happens in your mind and your self if you stay with one thing for a while. There isn't too much, I don't know, in myself personally. It definitely doesn't seem to be too much in our culture that encourages like just doing one thing at a time. Not rapidly reaching for whatever the next thing is. So much content. And so when I get the distinct honor of trying to prepare to teach each Sunday, it puts just one scripture in my head for a couple of weeks at a time. And it's a lot of fun to see how interpretation and understanding sort of shifts and changes. And almost every time the first read is not what ends up being what I'm most present to or what ends up coming out here on a Sunday morning. Have you guys ever heard that? It's one of my favorite things I ever saw on the internet. And it was about the creative process. I've shared this before, but it's like the creative, like, if you ever try to make something, tell me if you connect to this. So like stage one is the idea, and right after the idea comes this thought like, this is easy. I got this. All right, and then stage two is the beginning of the creating it, and then it's the thought, this is tricky. And then stage three is when it all starts to fall apart, and you think, this is bleep. And then stage four is, I am bleep, right? This it moves from guilt about the inability to perform as you thought you'd be able to shame about, the very nature of who you are. And then, you come through that, if you're lucky, and you get to stage five, and that's where things start to make sense again. And you go, okay, well, this is starting to make sense. And then stage six is, this is easy. And then stage seven is, this is awesome. That's the kind of as I read. And it is the exact process every time I've ever tried to write, do, make, try something new. There seems to be this inevitable movement through some period of absolute breakdown. And which is a universal pattern. It's this pattern of death and resurrection. It's where new things come from. And so that was a preamble to say I am honored to be here, to be seated with all of you, and to share some of what's come to me through reflection on this parable. This one's called The Workers in the Vineyard. And before we jump into the teaching, I'm going to offer two quotes for meditation. We'll stay with them for just a minute. But before we get to the words, I'll just invite all of us to take a moment and just to settle in where you are. And if it's helpful for you, take a few deep breaths just to collect yourself. And take a moment to check in on your own internal state. How are you feeling? What do you find yourself thinking about? What do you notice about where you're sitting? Are there any messages that your body seems to be communicating? And just take a moment to check in on these things, and as best you're able to breathe out, to exhale, and to let go of anything that pulls you or moves you out of a place of presence and just being here with open ears, with each other right now. All right, this is Carl Jung. He said, If we happen to have a religion whose basis is salvation, then our chief emotions in this life will most likely be fear and trembling. If we have a religion who finds its basis on wonder, then our chief emotion will be gratitude. And this is the poet Rumi. And he wrote, "Out beyond ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there's a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lays down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense." And here's a story that Jesus told in Matthew's gospel. Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day, and he sent them into his vineyard." Denarius, as far as I can tell, is a day's wage, so a fair price. About 9 in the morning, he went out and he saw others standing in the marketplace, and they weren't doing anything, and so he told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I'll pay you whatever's right." And so they went. He went out again about noon, and about 3 in the afternoon, and did the same thing. And about 5 in the afternoon, he went out and he found still others that were standing around. So he asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long, doing nothing?" They answered, "Because nobody's hired us." And so he said, "Will you also go and work in my vineyard?" When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." So the workers who were hired at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon came, and they received a denarius, full amount. And so when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. And when they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These who were hired last only work for an hour," they said, "and you've made them equal with us, who've borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But the landowner answered one of them, "I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? So take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" And so the last will be first, and the first will be last. That's what Jesus says. So, what's your immediate response to that? How does that hit you? Yeah? As in, like, right on? Yeah, that seems good, huh?
It's like, yeah, I get jealous, you know?
You could feel a little jealousy if you were there all day.
All day working,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, personally, as someone who's afflicted with habitual lateness to things, I find this story incredibly encouraging, but I could see how if you made it places on time, this may seem a little unfair. What else? I noticed, like, the provocation, because, like, this landowner guy, he could have just handed everybody, like, an unmarked envelope and said, "Thanks for your help," and sent them on their way. But he kind of made a show out of it, didn't he? Like, right? And so, obviously, provocation is sort of Jesus' intention with telling this story, too. It's meant to poke us in some way. And so I'm curious, what response, what emotion, what gets poked in our human nature? I hear jealousy. I think that's fair.
I think of two things. One, he does what he wants, and the humble always receives the great reward. Like, look at Moses. He was a little baby in a basket, or just some of the other small prophets. Like, people who were kings, but they were like a slave at first. So you don't know what the next step could be. The greater, awesome, even though you received less to begin with.
That's that deep trusting.
And that's definitely like a like a motif in the Old Testament is that it's always the unexpected, the one who's been left out, plucky little upstart. It's always the underdog who ends up being elevated. And so we would say that humility is rewarded. But here, let me ask this about humility then. So we're talking about that. Humility is a funny thing, right? If you think you're humble, then you probably are having a problem. So like humility feels like a virtue, but like look at the people in this story. He's just like, what are you? And they're like, I've just been laying around. Nobody picked me. Like it doesn't seem like there's no like noble evidence that this person they just kind of like happened to be there. Which even removes the aspect of humility, which feels like something that we could strive to become if we aren't already that, which I suppose would be the antithesis of humility, right? If you finally become humble. Are you humble? Well, here's one weird thing in the Old Testament. Moses is attributed as being the writer of Exodus. And there's a line in Exodus where it says, now Moses was the most humble man in all the land. And I always thought that was funny. Yeah, so there's something about there's like a chosenness about each of us that supersedes our abilities or even maybe even our understanding of what our abilities are.
For the people that are complaining, could it be like a reflection on their sense of entitlement about what they judge as fair and unfair?
Yeah. Yes, I think so.
I'm seeing it as a kind of a check on the heart gratitude level. Like, first people seem to think that, man, like, instead of seeing, I got hired on in this situation, I'm grateful. They're like, wait a minute, why are they, these people are getting less than me, and all of a sudden now, what about my gratitude for just getting hired for the day?
Yeah.
And the other people didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Got hired, they're just lazing around, whatever.
Yeah.
But then there's that whole comparison, like, I did this much, and look at what you did, which was a lot less.
Yeah.
And now I feel kind of like a little pissy instead of, I'm grateful to have a denarius and money to go home to.
Yeah. That's a great point. Isn't it weird how our mind does things like that and it like gobbles up our fun? But we just like roll with it. We're like, yeah, that's right, man. That's messed up. Tell me more. Come on, lay it on me. Now I feel real mad. This is awesome. Instead of just, yeah. And I suppose it works the other way too. Our mind, the comparison and the envy and jealousy and all these things will gobble up our happiness. But Jess had on one of the, there's a mirror in our house that has this she opened a fortune cookie and it said this. Because she's Jess, of course her fortune cookies say like wise and profound things. Mine are always like, beware of Tuesday and tie your shoes. The one that she opened said, gratitude helps us see the things that are there instead of the things that aren't. Something along this line. Which is it's an interesting thing, isn't it? It's like gratitude as a tool instead of a response. That it can help us to see how we're already blessed and not just be hanging out in the passenger seat of the mind that's going, but what about that guy? does. Yeah, that was the line that immediately jumped out to me the first time I read it. Are you envious because I'm generous? And so I looked up some of those words, and they didn't make the sermon. But you know what? We're going to do a director's cut right now because I happen to remember what they are, and it kind of has to do with what you're saying, Misty. I think the word envious doesn't have anything to do with envy in the Greek. It actually means an evil eye. It's like, it's like you kind of get this like thing going on, and he's like, why would that be the response to generosity? That's the question. But the word generosity doesn't actually mean generous. It means good. But it's like this weird word that's almost never used. It's a strange Greek word. It's a goodness that isn't attached to anything. It's just like, it's just there. It just is. And so it's not used very often because it's vague. It's like our word love, I suppose. It's like too many applications sort of thing, but it's probably a pretty good description of the nature of God, isn't it?
This is one that I've always thought is one of the few in the Bible that I can easily see will 100% guarantee happen to me. Because whenever we get to the other side of the gate, there's going to be people that 5 seconds before they left this place, they decided Jesus was right. And I've been doing this thing for 33 years at this point. So if they get a full measure of the life of Jesus Christ for 5 seconds worth of belief, and I get the same thing, looking at this as getting paid, I can't help but think I would leave and say, oh, okay, that's cool. It's all good. And then get home and think, I'll never work for that guy again. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, it takes some people so much longer, though. You know what I mean? Like the people that just reach a belief so late in life, and really they're the ones that lost. Or not lost, that's the worst thing to say. But what I mean by that is they missed out on a lot of joy and blessing because it took so long to reach a state of belief or repentance or the knowing that you need him took longer, and there's a lot of joy you miss out on without it.
What I love about Jesus is he's not performance-based.
Yeah. Yeah.
It could come down to the measure of time. Starting there, what is time?
All right, let's knock that one out real quick. Totally, man. Yes. Yeah, time. Yeah, right. Because all these things, like where we kind of swerved into there was this like transactional idea, and the transactional situation happens in time and space. There's something happening at a deeper level than we're normally conscious of. And the Bible tries to capture it when it tells us strange things like, before the foundation of the earth, the Lamb was slain. As in this problem of sin and separation that we're so entangled in, that we experience ourselves or that we export onto others. We project onto others that this must be how they're feeling also. But, before we listen for long enough to find out if that's even true. It's just this baseline assumption that we operate with. We're stuck in time trying to talk about things that are beyond, within, deeper. So if the Christian narrative is one that the separation that we experience from God is actually an illusion, in Colossians it says, once you are alienated from God in your minds because of your behaviors. This idea, this alienation takes place in our head, something that we experience as reality, and because we experience it so deeply, it becomes our reality, even though it isn't true. And so this message of Christ, this reconciliation that's happened through Christ, began before there was a problem. The problem was solved before there was ever a problem. Repentance, then, what this means is self-surrender. It's metanoia. It means noia is mind, meta is beyond. Repentance means to go beyond, deeper, underneath, above, however you conceptualize it, the mind that experiences separateness so extremely. The only way the mind can figure out to solve the separateness thing, even though the Christian messages keep saying grace, 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 we still turn it into transactions. We still feel like we're earning it in some way. Like it has to be earned by what? We know it isn't what we do. I'm sorry, I've been a Christian for a really long time. So a lot of this stuff has been rattling around in my brain for quite some time. And what I've noticed about churches is there can be a very open and accepting position on how we behave, right? Yeah, come as you are. You can even wear blue jeans, right? But where the openness, the open door policy begins to really demonstrate itself to be a facade is around the area of belief. Because tell me if this seems true to you. If you come into a Christian church and you have a pretty pronounced understanding of the spiritual world, but it doesn't seem congruent with sort of evangelical Christianity of the last 500 years, which is what all of us grew up in and thereby feel must be ultimate reality because it's the deepest thing that we've experienced. You look back in the tradition, you see there's been so many different ways that people have understood the mystery of Christ. But since we know it can't be our behavior that gets us back into union with God, that heals, that is the salvation towards this ache and this feeling of separation, it can't be our behavior because the Bible won't let it be that. It keeps talking about grace, that it can't be earned. And so to me, what I've observed, it's this interesting thing has happened, and so we said it can't be behavior, then it has to be belief, so that there's still some function of my mind. And though I think this is true, I think the danger of it is then it puts us back in control of our destiny in some way, and it puts us back in a position where there are some in and there are others out. And Jesus lived his entire life shattering that paradigm. That's what got him killed. The ones that were convinced they were in finally took him out because they were tired of hearing him telling the ones that were out that they're in. And then turned around and telling them, and I don't think he meant this personally, I just think he thought, to me, it seems like what he's saying is like, if your mind will only function in absolutes, black and white, in and out, wrong and right, that snake is going to eat its own tail. Like that's coming back for you too. And if you can only think in absolutes, then I hate to tell you, it's that kind of thinking that's outside. If anything's outside, it's that way of thinking. But of course, nothing's actually outside. It's so difficult because of time to accept grace and to accept our chosenness and to accept that everyone is equally as chosen as we are and that everyone is equally as valid. Okay, all right, none of this is, I'm only on page 3 of the notes. Any questions? What'd you just hear?
I kept thinking about the thief on the cross. You know, it was his last moment. He's like, you're in. You know, and then there's this saying, like, the middleman on the cross said I could come, which is really cool. You know, and he did nothing other than profess that he was the Christ. In his final breaths.
And isn't the picture of that, there's the one that mocks, that continues to stay in a position of separateness. You know, he's dying also, and so all he has left is this, like, I don't know, you know. And the other one moves into a position of surrender, and what Jesus says is like, you're all right, you're already there. You'll be with me in paradise today, like now, somehow, even right now.
Kind of blows apart that whole idea that the more you work and the more you do, the more God will bless you.
or the harder you believe.
I was thinking a lot about like, I was thinking a lot about what he said up there because like that used to make me really angry as well. Like it would invoke that emotion, and it's kind of like, well, if I could have spent all this extra time like partying, having fun, like doing all this cool stuff that the world says is awesome, and then at the last second be like, I believe, like, you know, and then kind of like shows where you value, or where you place value. So like that could be the laziness of life, just like the not caring. So like I'm starting to realize now like the intention and like the discipline you apply to things is like what makes it valuable. So like even like religion or like just going to the beach, like if you go to places like without intention, they just kind of are. But like when you like make it sacred in your own mind, it gives it a purpose.
Right? Right? It's like your body is, don't you realize your body is a temple? You can't go to this place or that to find God because God's closer than all that. You can go with an awareness of God, and then everything is sacred.
Exactly. It's like a sunrise can just be like a beautiful sunrise, but then like if you view it as like a work of art from God, like it makes it so much more like purposeful to me.
And I think
That's
that-
beautiful.
That fun is it's lost searching.
Yeah.
It's searching for the thing that won't fulfill.
Yeah.
It's all already fun.
Yeah.
I keep thinking from what he said, that it's like, would you rather love and like lose, or rather never love at all?
Mm.
And that's what I keep thinking is like, can you miss those people even 5 seconds before finally held his hand?
Mm.
Like, you couldn't reach it the whole life, but at the end you could.
Mm.
And it's like,
Isn't that beautiful? Mm-hmm.
Going back to what he said, my husband and I have had a hard time trying to talk to our daughters, and because we don't want to force a belief on them, we want them to come to it on their own. And their main problem is, if I go my whole life and I believe and I do what I'm supposed to do, but 5 minutes before he dies, Jeffrey Dahmer says, I believe, like, it's hard to justify how that's, like, fair. So it's hard for them to find that level of belief, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you can't find it for them. What about the story of the prodigal son? I just am reminded of this, like the whole, you know, this whole thing of like, oh man, like, oh, it's such an interesting paradigm. I completely relate. I spent most of my 20s like this, you know, where I was just like, but I want to party. I'll get to that later. Like I knew that if I looked too closely at it, it would get me, you know? Like I knew if I slowed down for long enough, it would gobble me up and it would become, yeah. And so I didn't want that. I wanted to party. And I think it's interesting that, like it's kind of what Jesus' story, the prodigal son is about, you know? The prodigal son, and the God character in that story doesn't stop the kid or tell him he's, you know, I think he's kind of like hurt, but he doesn't try to talk him out of it. And then the punchline there at the end of the prodigal son story would be that, you know, the question the punchline, the whole, it seems, because the last little bit of that story is the son who didn't leave, you know, the good boy who tried to do it right. And the question that seems to arise is like, who's more trapped? Are they equally as trapped? Are you equally as trapped in the running as you are in the doubling down? Because what both of them lacked is this awareness. It's one of the most beautiful lines in Scripture. What both of them learned, I suppose, would be this awareness, where the Father says, that you are always with me and all I have is yours. What were you going to ask, Chuck?
I guess my question is, there's a discussion of, like you just said, the prodigal son and the other son.
Mm.
But our time on earth can be spent either in heaven
Yeah.
or in hell.
Mm. Yep.
I get to choose that now.
Yes.
The man on the cross, he didn't spend his life in heaven.
Mm.
eating pig slop. But God is a loving God who has paid the price for our poor decisions.
And
Hell is
continues
when
to
God
do
is
so.
not with you. Heaven is when God is with you.
Or our awareness,
Yeah.
when that God
Or,
is with us.
Yeah.
yeah, he's always with us. But it's like he said, in our mind,
Mm.
the renewing of our mind, we can spend heaven on earth. We can experience that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and that seems true. The interesting thing in some of these stories, though, I feel like what it asks us is, are we any more or less in the experience of heaven? Suppose what they illustrate is that our circumstances, and to some degree, even our behavioral choices, don't really demonstrate to us, and certainly not to anybody else, what space we happen to be occupying, right? Because I didn't know the thief on the cross. I would say that maybe I would assume there probably had to have been a lot of prep work and lessons learned to come to a point of excruciating pain and to maintain a sense of hope. There's evidence of some work being done. And I feel like the punchline of the prodigal son is this idea that the kid that stayed behind to do the right thing is every bit as much in prison as the kid that ran away. Because the kid that stayed home was jealous of the fact he was in his tight little cage where he was unable to celebrate with the father. He was still stuck in his stuff.
Well, yeah, the good son reminds me of the first worker hired.
Yeah.
The right thing, I showed up, I'm doing it all, but they're just showing up at the last minute and getting everything.
Yeah. Okay, all right. We better move on here. This is what all of this is about. So this is part one. It's not fair. I feel like it is fairness that we're talking about. It's not fair. I don't know that I found a more helpful tool in all of literature to understand the human ego than Calvin. Just so good. All right, so it's not fair. Here's a little news flash. People typically don't like getting less of something than someone else. They also don't like getting less than they feel like they deserve. In fact, there is a psychological name for this. It's called inequity aversion. And it's when an individual responds negatively to receiving a different reward than they deserve, typically shown by rejecting the reward, never mind, I don't want it anyway, or by refusing to participate in the activity any further. Inequity aversion. So there's a study out of Emory University sometime in the last 20 years. And what it sought to determine was where does this disdain for unfairness come from? It's this pronounced sense of justice. Is this unique to the human condition? Is this experienced in the animal kingdom? How is it that we determine what's fair and what isn't, and what makes us feel so upset when something feels unfair? And so this study I just read about went like this. There were pairs of monkeys. They were placed in adjacent cages so that they could see each other, and they were trained to take turns giving small rocks to their human handler. All right, so they had a little job to do. They're working shoulder to shoulder. Every time they passed over a small rock, they got rewarded with a little piece of cucumber, and apparently monkeys really like little pieces of cucumber, so they are both pretty jazzed on this job and were eagerly handing rocks over to the handlers. And then they switched it up after a lot of series of repetitions. And what happened was the first monkey hands a rock over, he gets a cucumber. Second monkey hands a rock over, he gets a grape. Now, grapes, apparently, I guess monkeys go bananas for grapes. And so monkey 2 gets a grape unexpectedly instead of a cucumber. And monkey 1 notices because they're right next to each other. And so then monkey 1 eagerly hands a rock over and puts his hand out expecting a grape, but he gets a cucumber. And then they repeated this twice. Another grape for monkey 2, another cucumber for monkey 1, and monkey 1 just loses his stuff. He starts First, he won't play the game. He won't eat the cucumber. He throws it on the ground. And then he won't hand a rock over. He's like this. And then when the handler's kind of gesturing to get a rock, the monkey started throwing the rocks at the glass. Like, it's just like, no. You deserve better than this. Totally happy with cucumbers until a grape entered the scene. What's that joke about the thought that kicks you out of the kingdom of heaven? You guys know it's like this is the thought that kicks you out of the kingdom of heaven. Like, it's really nice here, but I wish I had a pillow. The thought that kicks you out of paradise.
That's so hard to be around, too. I'm a teacher, and we experience that quite a bit. You know, you do a good thing, and then want the next thing. And you're like, you want to be like, remove, never mind. And obviously I don't, but there is that just always wanting more
Yeah.
mentality.
Dude, it is hard to be around. I've got like 12 of those kids living inside of me. They're driving me crazy. I just want to be happy for a minute. Is it too much to ask?
Well, one of my girlfriends and I were talking about that. Like, what is this desire to be comfortable and happy? What is that? You know, and the thing she said, and I don't know that this is true, but we were created to live in harmony with God in a perfect world. And when we're not, that's unsettling. And when you wrap your mind around that, like, that makes a ton of sense to me for why, like, if you're in pain, all you want is to not be in pain. If you're anxious, you just want your mind to be clear again. And it's because, like, we weren't made for this world, you know? So when we're in it, it's uncomfortable. But I was like, that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, why is it so uncomfortable in this world anyway?
We don't put
Things all tight and hot, and there's snakes. Temperature's never quite right. It's true.
But then you feel bad for being uncomfortable because you're supposed to be content. And you're like,
Be more content. So this is my question, all right? So there's the monkey mind, right? We're familiar with the monkey mind, the lizard brain, this thought that kicks us out of paradise. The cucumbers are cool until the grapes come along, and then I'm mad at this guy for getting a grape. So why? Like, what is the benefit of what appears to be an overdeveloped sense of fairness? Like, why have our brains evolved to that? You know, I question things like this sometimes. I don't know, I'm not really sure what the answer is, but I do have a theory that I'd like to pitch. And it goes like this. Like, what is the evolutionary benefit of our innate sense of fairness? And the funny thing, too, here about this, I read about this, they did a bunch of little various versions of this study, and what they found was they studied like 60 different species of monkeys, and some didn't get as upset as others. The ones that lived in groups, the ones that had learned to survive as a group, surprisingly got more upset, more aware of like the way a hierarchy works. And so you feel a little bit lower on the hierarchy if you're not getting the grape. And if you're lower on the hierarchy, you're probably closer to the hyenas that are trying to eat you, right? So it's like this survival situation. No monkeys out of any of them, they tried this little thing where they would see if, so this is kind of cool. Sometimes a monkey gets a grape, 2 gets a grape, 1 gets a cucumber, 2 gets another grape, 1 gets a cucumber, looks upset. 2 will stop eating the grapes until either they both get grapes or they both get cucumbers. Sweet empathy. But what they did notice in primates is that none of them felt like they were they were receiving too much. If they got a gift and the one next didn't, then they would always just eat the gift. So it's survival. It all just comes down to survival. We're all just trying to stay alive, and it's really hard to stay alive. And we've got it pretty easy, and we're still freaked out most of the time. Right? So the brain, this whole thing is it's a survival machine. You know, that's what it's doing in here. Is it's just trying to keep us alive, and it's finely tuned for just that task. I'm 41. I don't know how I made it. So the brain is a survival machine. And I want to look really quickly at stages of early childhood development. So it's been proven that a child doesn't begin to develop a sense of itself as a separate person or a separate entity until they're 6 to 9 months old. It's interesting. And you come from the womb where it's all right there. And then we're sort of violently expelled from this place of union and bliss and into a world that's bright and noisy. And before there can even be, what causes a child to begin to notice that they're a separate person? Is that they start to experience mom and dad leaving the room, and they start to feel what it is to be alone. And when a baby feels it has needs that require being met, of course, how do you have when you're 6 months old, how do you have your needs met? Pull yourself up by the bootstraps and get a job? Like, there's only one way to stay alive and to have your needs met when you're experiencing being alone for the first time, and that's what to cry and to make a bunch of noise. And hopefully, if you have empathetic parents, they quickly return and respond with something loving, and the child's soothed, and whatever needs are met. And as a child grows and begins to individuate more, preferences start to develop. We start to figure out, I like this and not that. And as we develop this sense of preferences, the funny thing happens is that the preferences remain, they feel to us like needs. We've never really known what it is. We haven't really known luxury yet. It's just survival. And so the part of our brain, the whole of our brain that's trained for survival begins to perceive our preferences for needs. And this is why people call like the 2s and 3s like the terrible 2s and the terrible 3s. It's because the child's beginning to figure out what it is that they like. And a lot of the time it's the kind of stuff that you wish they didn't like, And then the response, the way that, but for the child, it just feels like a need that needs to be met, Just can't, what is it? Give me an example. I don't want to give you one. What's a weird thing that your kids asked for?
Well, it was like before you gave them candy, and then once they discover candy, they're like, more candy. They're like, eat your green beans, buddy. You still have green beans.
Yeah, you guys know the adventures of Huck Finn. That famous passage where Tom is painting the fence, his aunt's fence, and doesn't want to do it, and so he tricks these other folks into doing his chores for him. Remember that whole sequence? Do you remember what the prize is? Like, he promises he'll give him something. You know what it is? Fruit. That in the 1800s was payment for doing somebody else's chores. They would give you their fruit. And then somebody invented candy. And you have to do all these strange negotiations to help your child eat fruit. And it used to be a treat. And it's not even a cucumber. So we develop these sets of preferences that feel like needs, and then we go about having these needs met by making a lot of noise. And depending on how our parents respond, there are various attachment styles that are developed. The most common are secure or anxious or avoidant. You could look into that more. It's interesting if that's new to you. And so a child learns what behaviors get them what they want, which is attention and affection. And the reason that we want attention and affection is because it's tied directly to our sense of survival, and our brain is a survival machine. And so our personality is formed by these sets of preferences and the responses that we get to the ways that we reach out and communicate our need. Okay? And so we start to try to cater our responses in a way that will hopefully have our parents see us in a light where they happily, gleefully, joyfully, calmly respond to what it is that we're asking for, and our needs are met. And this is where our personality begins. Personality comes from this Greek word persona. You know what that means? It means mask. Our English word personality comes from this word that means a mask. And this mask that we develop, like whether we're the athlete or the jokester, we're shy or sad or angry or loud or quiet or rebellious or rule following or studious or overachieving or underachieving, whatever it is that gets attention, because attention is directly related to survival. And so what happens from a very young age is this confusion begins between what we want and what's actually necessary for our survival, and we can easily end up with an exaggerated sense of need, and in extreme cases this develops into full-on narcissism, where we become fascist dictators of our tiny kingdoms. And I just feel like, narcissism is a pretty buzzy word right now. And what's that old, The Office? Remember that show, The Office? Who's the guy that plays Michael Scott? He said in an interview one time, he said, Steve Carell, he said, if you don't know a Michael Scott, if you don't have a Michael Scott in your life, it's because you are Michael Scott. I feel like it's kind of the same thing with like narcissism. We're like, that guy's a narcissist. Well, I don't know. Like, it seems helpful to remember that we all begin life as little narcissists. And it seems helpful to check in on that impulse often, especially when we are exporting labels elsewhere. And the reason I bring all of this up is it seems to me that sin, what we call sin, might be best defined as this wide variety of unhealthy coping mechanisms that we develop over a lifetime in attempts to soothe our sense of separateness. Sin is a wide variety of unhealthy coping mechanisms that we develop over a lifetime, starting at the very beginning, in attempts to soothe our sense of separateness. And the New Testament Greek word for sin actually reflects this reality. It's hamartano. The root words are alpha, a. When that begins a word, it means it cancels out what comes next. A means without. And martano means a part, a share, a portion. And so sin, the actual, the root meaning of this word means to feel like I'm not a part. To act in a way that perpetuates the sense of separateness. Even though I'm only acting this way to try to heal, distract, soothe my own sense of separateness, it reinforces. You ever find yourself doing that? You're like, why am I saying this right now? This is going to do exactly the opposite of what I'm hoping to experience, but I'm in too deep now. I'm just going to keep saying it. You ever get stuck in situations like that? So when we feel like we're not a part of the whole, when we experience separateness, not a part quickly becomes not enough, because there's a fear of limited resources, and all of it is just scared of dying. It's the brain. It's the survival machine. And the genius of this parable is the way that it triggers us. It makes us feel like something unjust happens, but if you stay with it long enough, you see that nobody's been cheated, that actually there's enough to go around. Everybody's been paid fairly. Some people just got a little surprise. He didn't take anything from one person to give to somebody else. He's like, it's all mine anyway. And even just the language that's used, the universe, God, the landowner in the story, is just so kind. He's his friend. He's like, friend, have I cheated you? It's like this gentle invitation to look again and to look deeper than the automatic response that comes through first. And to take these events when we're triggered, the stronger the emotion, the stronger the sense of justice and injustice, whatever your we all have different things that freak us out. I've done this thing in the last year and a half. I've faced a number of situations that seemed like too much for me to handle, and I'd feel so confused, and I'd be afraid about coming in the next day and trying to figure out how to handle this thing. And then I would just try to visualize the people in my life that are really calm and collected and confident, and I would think, how would that person handle it? And then every now and then I would get deep enough into visualizing how they'd handle it that I would feel how silly it was that I was this worked up about it. It's like I could almost take on their perspective for a minute, and they were like, dude, you have no idea what I faced. This would be a dream. Do you know this thing? And so everything that triggers us, the immediate response generally is we want to become comfortable again. And so something in us kicks into gear about how do we fix this or that. And if we can't fix it, then how do we commiserate about it? And if we can't commiserate about it, what's wrong with our friends? And how do we find, we just keep looking out and trying to fix situations and circumstances. And of course, the healthiest response is to, the better question is always whoa, why am I so worked up? And to move through these big secondary emotions and try to get down to the source of what it is that we're afraid of. This is Carl Jung. He says, this is interesting. He says, God is the name, it's the 12th slide. God is the name by which I designate all things which cross my willful path violently and recklessly. All things which upset my subjective views, plans, and intentions and change the course of life, for better or worse. That's an interesting functional definition for God. It doesn't take much living or much road behind our tires for us to realize that it's the pain of separation. It's the thing that triggers our fear. It's the situation that we thought we wouldn't be able to survive. It's the suffering. It's the suffering that transforms us, because the suffering teaches us a lesson that we, for some reason, will not learn on our own, absent from it. And it's the lesson of surrender. It's the opportunity to reckon with how much of what we took to be control that we had over our lives and our circumstances and situations was extremely fragile at best and an illusion completely at worst. And it isn't until we are confronted, often, many times, with the fear that overwhelms our normal way of viewing and responding to the world, which is with our mind, that we begin to experience that there's something deeper, and it's already happening. And it's right here within each of us. And it's what Jesus called the kingdom of heaven. And he said the kingdom of heaven won't come like this way. Like nobody can tell you where it is. It isn't over here. It isn't over there. Nobody can bring you to it. Nobody can remove it from you. The kingdom of heaven is within you. And St. Paul said that as we are transformed by the renewal of our mind, what we begin to experience is a peace that passes understanding. A peace that's deeper than rational explanation, a peace that doesn't even concern itself with why I feel the way I do. There's this passage in Hebrews, and it says, strive, it's like take your effort to a fine point. Harness your ambition and direct it towards this one thing, that you may enter the rest of God. It's the promise that Christ made as he prayed for us in John 17. He said, Lord, may they know that they are one, as we are one, that I am in them and that you are in me. That Christ is seated at the right hand of God and that we are seated in Christ. And that this is all happening right alongside everything else that we experience. That there's this place of rest where we can come from. Where we can learn to navigate life's circumstances with a sense of contentment. Because we realize that what we need is here. It's already here. It's just happening at a subtle level that's so quiet. It requires us to slow down and to quiet ourselves and to listen in a deeper way. Buechner said, a crucial eccentricity of the Christian faith is the assertion that people are saved, experience this wholeness, by grace. There's nothing you have to do. There's nothing you have to do. There's nothing you have to do. Now, wholeness, this place of wholeness is difficult to recognize. Because it's difficult to recognize exactly because it is complete. Wholeness, union, it doesn't function through comparison, through the opposite of light and dark. It's difficult to recognize wholeness through our ordinary modes of perception, because our ordinary modes of perception rely on definitions that explain what something isn't before we can get to something that is. And the reality of God is that God is. Nothing to define against it. I remember one time, my son, August, he was young. He was probably 3 years old. And I said, we were riding in the car, and I said, what's an adjective that you would use to describe God? God is what? And he said, he didn't understand. So I said, I'll go first. I'd say love. I'd say God is love. And he was quiet for like 30 seconds. And then he said, is. I said, is what? And he's like, God is. That was his adjective. And that's wholeness. And it's the only way that we can make sense of grace is to give up on our desire to make sense of grace, to feel like we're earning anything or losing anything. And Jesus said God causes the sun to shine on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the just and the unjust. The categories must be broken, you know? Otherwise, you could just drive down the road and see the farmers with the burned out crops and think, you know, he's not good to his employees. But it doesn't work that way, does it? St. Paul said, it's grace. It's by grace that you've been saved. This is not from yourselves. It's the gift of God. Salvation, wholeness, union, coming home isn't a reward for doing good things. So nobody gets to boast. John 1, out of God's fullness, completeness, wholeness, what we've all received is grace in place of grace already given. Is this not beautiful? Yeah, Katie, if you want to come on up. This is a story from the desert tradition in Christianity. And I'm going to close with it. As the band, I'll do this too, as the band gets set up. So if another 12 minutes or so together, and in this space and time as we conclude here, like, you are welcome to use it however you'd like. You can sing along with the music, you can rest and listen to the tunes, you can reflect on what you heard, you can pray with each other. If you would like somebody to pray with you, if you make your way down, just I don't know, I guess maybe go to that second tier. How about that, where the little candles are burning, and somebody will be over to pray with you. You can make a run for the door. You can take a nap. You really can do whatever you'd like with this space. The communion elements will be available. You're welcome to make use of those. But this is a little story from the desert tradition, and it's about this idea of wholeness, complete union. It goes like this. So, once upon a time, some seekers from the city asked the local monastic a question. They said, "How does one seek union with God?" And the wise one said, "Listen, the harder you seek, the more distance you experience between God and you." So, what does one do about the distance? The seekers asked. And the elder said simply, "Just understand that it isn't there." "Does that mean that God and I are one?" the disciples asked. And the monastic answered, "Just like the sun and its light, the ocean and the wave, the vine and the branch, not one, but not two." And so let's use this space just to rest, to pay attention to our breath, and to be drawn into the place that doesn't need explanations or comparisons, and that experiences contentment right here, just as things already are.